Hi, I'm Emma, and I'm a huge book nerd.
You're my library, always open for business, but you never show it. You're just sitting with it, but I know the score, and you're killing.
So today I want to share with you the books that I finished reading in July, so this will be like a July reading wrap-up. In the month of July, I read 9 books total, and I read a total of 4,020 pages. So I'd say that's a pretty decent reading month. So I'm just going to kind of go through from the beginning of the month to the end of the month and tell you a little bit about each book I read and what I thought and if I recommend it to you. I check out a lot of my books from the library, so I don't own copies of every book I read. So I'm going to try to put a picture of the book up here, but if that doesn't work out, then I'll just talk about it. But the first book I actually read via audiobook, and that was The Firm by John Grisham. And The Firm is about a young law student who straight out of law school gets recruited by this law firm in Texas, I believe, and it pays really well, and there's all these kind of weird things going on with the firm. They really, really want him. They want everyone who works for them to be happily married, have a wife and kids, and there's like a lot of really weird requirements for this firm. He joins the firm and then finds himself stuck in a very bad situation. And that's all I'll say about it because I don't want to give any spoilers away. It's a thriller. It was pretty good. I gave it 3 stars. I enjoyed it. It's not one of my favorites. The next book I read in July was It by Stephen King. And this one had been on my list for a really long time. And for those of you who don't know, It is almost 1,200 pages long, which is a really, really long book. And I was terrified to get started with it because, first of all, it's a terrifying story. If you don't know what it's about these kids in a town called Derry in Maine, and every 20-something years, children start disappearing and turning up murdered and mutilated, and it's very horrifying. And basically these kids figure out what's going on and they try to stop it. I really wanted to get to this book because the movie is coming out September 2nd, I believe, and I am so excited. If you haven't seen the trailer, go watch it. It looks so good. So I finally got it out of the way and I gave it 5 stars. I loved it. It was, I think, the scariest book I have ever read. And if you like Stephen King, I highly recommend you read it. Anyways, I'll move on. The third book I read in July is The Rest of Us Just Live Here by Patrick Ness. And Patrick Ness is one of my favorite authors. If you saw my first video, I talk about his book A Monster Calls, which is possibly my favorite book of all time. I love it so much. So I've tried to read a lot of Patrick Ness's work because I think he's a really great writer. Unfortunately, I was actually really disappointed with this book. It was boring, to be honest. So the premise is kind of that it's about these kids who are ordinary in a world where bad things happen to indie kids. So it's kind of making fun of things like Twilight and all those vampire stories and werewolf stories where teenagers are fighting these evil beings. And maybe I didn't really get it because I don't read a lot of those books. And it was just, nothing happened. There was no plot. They just kind of lived. It was, I don't know, I think it could have been cool, but it really wasn't, and it was just kind of meh. It wasn't really bad. I gave it 3 stars. I honestly probably wouldn't recommend it because it was just boring. There are so many better books out there, and I think you should read books that are either will help you as a person or will really entertain you, and I don't think that does either. So anyways, the next book that I read in July was Jurassic Park by Michael Crichton, and I really liked that book. I gave it 4 stars. I love the movie, and I had never read the book, so I figured I should probably read it. This is actually the book that I'm currently reading. So I won't finish this book in July because this is The Lost World, which is the sequel. But I figured I'd hold it up, so at least I have some book to hold here. But I really liked Jurassic Park. It was really interesting. I read the whole thing in a single day because it just kept rolling forward. It was really engaging. A great thriller. If you like the movie, I think you'll love the book. It's really fast-paced, and it's not exactly the same. There are some differences, for sure. And as always, I think the book's better than the movie, even though I watched the movie first in this case, and the movie is really good. The book is just better. The next book I read in July was Exit Pursued by a Bear by E.K. Johnston. And this is a young adult contemporary novel about a cheerleader during her senior year of high school, and she gets raped. And it's the story of how she struggles to move on afterwards and to enjoy her life again. And I think this is a really important story to read. I really appreciate that this is a topic that's being addressed in young adult literature because it's something that does happen to high school girls, and I think it's really important for people to be aware of that because so many people think, oh no, rape doesn't happen. It couldn't happen at my high school, but it can, and it can be someone you know, and it can be someone you don't know, and it's a really scary topic to talk about and uncomfortable for some people, but I think that this book handled it really well. I did have a couple issues, but they would get really spoilery, and I don't want to get spoilery here, but if you're really interested in a separate review of Exit Pursued by a Bear, I'd be happy to do that. By the way, while we're on the topic of this book, the title is fantastic. Like, just take a second. Exit Pursued by a Bear. And then think about she's in her senior year of high school and she gets raped, and her last year of high school before she exits, she's dealing with this awful bear of a thing. It's so great. If I can get the cover up here, the cover's really beautiful too. So yeah, if you've read Exit Pursued by a Bear, let me know what you think. I'd love to chat with someone about it because I think it's a really interesting topic, and there are not a lot of young adult books that address that. In fact, if you know of any other young adult books that address rape, leave them down below in the comments because I'd be really interested to read those. The next book I read in July, I do have. It's In the Lake of the Woods by Tim O'Brien, and I bought this at Goodwill for 50 cents because I love Tim O'Brien. He's, again, one of my favorite authors. His book, The Things They Carried, is one of my all-time favorite books because I love the way he talks about truth. And we could get into a discussion on that in another video. But I was really excited to read this book because I really enjoyed his other book. And this wasn't as good as The Things They Carried, in my personal opinion, but it was really interesting. I gave it 4 stars. It's about a Vietnam veteran who comes home from the war, and he's involved in politics, and he was involved in the My Lai massacres, and that comes out in his political campaign and ruins his campaign, basically. And then his wife goes missing. And this book, it's a mystery thriller that delves into trying to figure out what happened to his wife. And I won't tell you too much about it because it's really interesting the way he deals with it, but it again kind of addresses like what is truth and how can we find the truth and does the truth matter? It's really cool. I would love to talk more about how Tim O'Brien addresses the issue of truth, but that's a long discussion for another video, so I'm gonna keep moving on. The next book I read in July is American Sniper by Chris Kyle. Oh, I have a lot of things to say about this book. I made a blog post on this book and I'll leave that linked down below so that you can read my full thoughts, because this video would be way too long if I really went into depth. But I did enjoy this book. I gave it 4 stars. I thought it was really interesting. There are also a lot of things about this book that made me really angry, because Chris Kyle is kind of a scary person, because there are a lot of things that he says about himself that would make me very afraid to be around him and make me wonder about his motives for joining the army anyways. And don't get me wrong, of course, I completely respect and admire anyone who fights for our country, but this guy's ideas and justifications and things he says about fighting are kind of messed up. So if you want to hear more about my thoughts on that, please check out my blog, which I'll link down below. The next book I read in July is Between Shades of Grey by Ruta, I'm going to say this wrong, Ruta Sepetys. I don't know how to say her name, I'm sorry. But I finished this yesterday and I really enjoyed it. I gave it 4 stars. I think my favorite thing about this book is when it's been on my list for a really long time, and when I initially put it on my list, I thought it was a book about Nazi Germany in World War II. But it's actually not. It's about Soviet Russia, and it's about the work camps in Soviet Russia. So people being deported from Lithuania, and there were several countries from which people were being deported and taken to these work camps in Siberia, which, if you don't know, that's essentially the North Pole. Of course, it's fiction, but the things that happened to the characters in this book happened to people in real life, which is really interesting. And there were a lot of aspects of this book that I really enjoyed, especially there's a guard who we get to sympathize with, because he doesn't like doing what he's doing and he helps the prisoners. And it's really interesting because you kind of hate him, but you feel bad for him, and then you really get to come to appreciate him because he does help. And it kind of makes you think about, it made me think about anyways, would it be better for someone in this position, in this guard's position, to denounce what the Soviets are doing, or to play along so he can help people in these camps? And I don't know, I think it's really interesting to think about. But I gave this book 4 stars. I definitely recommend this because I think it's an important topic, and it's a pretty good book. Not one of my favorite of all times, but definitely good. And the last book that I read in July is The Complete Poetry of Maya Angelou, and I give this 4 stars. I just finished it today. Some of it's really beautiful. I actually am not the biggest fan of Maya Angelou. I think sometimes her writing can be really arrogant, and I hate to say that because she's such a brilliant woman and I respect her a lot, but sometimes she kind of writes with this air of, I know absolutely everything there is to know, and I don't think that's possible. I don't think you can know everything there is to know ever. I don't think anyone does. And there are times when it bothers me a little bit because she comes across with this, I have all the answers, and I don't think she does. So that's my take on her, but I did enjoy this, and some of the poetry is really beautiful. If I tell you to look up anything, I would say look up Phenomenal Woman. It's a really beautiful poem and really empowering. So if you're into poetry, I would definitely check this out because it's a very good, solid collection. So those are all the books I read in July. I hope you enjoyed this video, and please like and subscribe and leave comments down below. Tell me what you read this month, what you really enjoyed, and what you think I should add to my reading list. Thank you so much for watching. Bye!